When the Stop Killing Games movement started a year ago, it was but a blip on the radar for publishers and developers. It was something that they didn't really pay much attention to, believing that it was a movement that was ultimately going to die out. But it has grown at a pace that nobody was expecting, with Pirate Software in particular, his criticisms of this movement, and the way that was done from a misinformed perspective. The way that has all culminated in Stop Killing Games garnering a lot of support and it achieving its goal to the point where government intervention is now highly likely. And now we're at a point where game publishers are making public statements and being asked directly about Stop Killing Games, suggesting that AAA game publishers are feeling the pressure of Stop Killing Games, and they're fearing what legislation surrounding it might do for their bottom line. It'd be great for consumers if the movement and what it's trying to achieve were to move forward with legislation, but AAA publishers prefer to not have anything sort of chaining them down, even if it's for the betterment of consumers, because it might impact their bottom line or might inconvenience them. So Stop Killing Games right now, it is at 1.4 million signatures, the European Citizens Initiative, which is fantastic. The thing that happened when it reached 1 million, which was the goal to move this to legislation, was that a lot of those signatures could be fake. While people might have been well-intended in trying to support the Stop Killing Games movement, faking signatures is just both a crime and also something that the government can detect. So what this movement needed was a safety net of hundreds of thousands more votes to make sure that the fake votes don't make it so that when you count the legitimate votes, we're actually under 1 million. But now having reached 1.4 million, it is highly likely that this initiative will move forward and that the European Union will take discussions and legislation surrounding this seriously. So I say we have done it. I'd say this is like a pretty good place to be in. The deadline was July 31st, 2025, but it was only in the last month or so where this movement really gained traction because of the essentially common enemy that Pirate Software became in his assertions against Stop Killing Games, and the way that the misinformation there caused people to rally for Stop Killing Games, because this is actually a movement that would benefit consumers, would preserve games, and would ensure that video games don't just disappear from the face of the planet, don't die off completely, and consumers don't have products that they purchased get taken away from them. So this is all ultimately a good thing. Now, Video Games Europe responded back in July 4th, 2025, and I discussed this in a previous video, but they make claims that just ultimately misunderstand the movement itself, letting people know that, companies have to sunset games, and that has to be something that they are able to do. Stop Killing Games doesn't argue against that. It's more about leaving games in some kind of functional, playable state. You don't have to maintain it. You have to update it. You have to balance it. Just make sure it exists on some level and that consumers don't have that product stripped from them. They talk about the inability to protect players if they let players host their own private servers for online games and stuff when that's just not under their jurisdiction. And beyond that, they kind of spout bullshit about how prohibitively expensive it'd be to leave games in a functional, playable state and not have them disappear from the face of the planet forever, and how this would curtail developer choice and the like, which is just, weak excuses for them having the leeway to take products away from paying customers who gave a piece of their livelihood and trusting that this is a product that they'd be able to have agency over. Fast forward to later this month, July 20th, 2025, and the company that kickstarted it all, Ubisoft, has come out with a statement after they were asked about the Stop Killing Games movement in a recent annual meeting. During a Q&A session, there was apparently a quote-unquote aggressive questioner who confronted the executive, Yves Guillemot, CEO of Ubisoft, about the Stop Killing Games movement and push on its plans for game preservation going forward, which is great to see that even during investor meetings and stuff like that, we're seeing publishers getting grilled about this topic, because now it's come to a point where it is tangible. Legislators will look at this now because of the sheer amount of support that this movement has garnered. Before, with a statement from Video Games Europe, that was an organization representing and lobbying for major AAA publishers, but this is the first time we're getting a comment directly from a publisher like Ubisoft. And Ubisoft being the first to comment is appropriate, given that they're the ones who kind of kickstart all of this with the sunsetting of The Crew and the way they removed the license for that game from players' libraries, and with the way Ubisoft's executives have said things like how gamers have to get comfortable with not owning their games. So the fact that they're kind of the ones getting the most grill about this is, mwah, chef's kiss. So here's Guillermo's response to this aggressive questioner who inquired about what they think about the Stop Killing Games movement gaining traction. He said, regarding the petition, we operate in a market, and whenever we release a game, we provide a lot of support for that game. We also provide a lot of services to make sure that the game is accessible and remains playable 24/7. I mean, providing services for customers is something that every company does. That does not give you the right to strip away products from customers. I bring up the IKEA example because I don't know, we recently bought a lot of IKEA furniture and that's just on my mind. But if I bought an IKEA furniture and IKEA provides 24/7 services for that product, it doesn't mean that one day, just because they decided to decommission that product, they can come into my house and decide that I don't own that product anymore and just come in and burglar my table that I bought or whatever, the furniture that I bought from them from my own home. That's what video game companies do when they do things like remove licenses from players' libraries. They are sending a ghost, a digital ghost, to just burglar your digital products. And the fact that there's some kind of distinction between physical and digital products, to me, is kind of ludicrous. They're both ultimately still products, just in different forms. And the fact that just because it isn't as invasive to remove digital products from players' libraries, because you can do that with a press of a few buttons and you don't have to physically go into someone's house to take that product away from them, doesn't make it any less of a baffling and just kind of egregious act to take products that customers paid for away from the purchasers. Like, it wouldn't be allowed with physical products that you purchase. It shouldn't be allowed with digital products either. You providing support and services for the product doesn't excuse you eventually deciding that you can just take that away from customers who have paid money for that product. He continues, so we provide information regarding the game and how long the game can be played, and players and buyers are forewarned that eventually the game may be discontinued. That is not true. The thing about a live service is it is entirely uncertain how long it'll go for or when it'll be shut down, because it's highly dependent on that live service's success. There have been live services like Concord that were sunset within like 2 weeks of its launch. Whereas there have been services like Fortnite that have gone on and on and on for many, many years. World of Warcraft, I mean, that's an MMO that has been up there for a while and it shows no signs of slowing down. And then there are some live services that fit somewhere in between where they get shut down after a couple years of being up. And so there's no way to really tell. It's ultimately up to the publishers and how much they feel the game is worth supporting that defines how long the game can actually be played. Because once that's sunset, it's sunset forever. And then there's the fact that single-player games are also impacted because a lot of single-player games now are requiring downloads in order for them to be played. Ubisoft games require day-one patches, even if you get the physical edition, that act as a key, these patches, to be able to access the game. Well, what happens when servers shut down and Ubisoft just no longer, as service providers, provide that patch? It might be decades down the line, but it will come. It is an eventuality where those physical games that you bought, because you're not able to download that patch, if you don't have that game already downloaded, then the physical media that you bought will be worthless. That game has essentially been stripped away from you. So it is multifaceted, the Stop Killing Games movement. And games often cannot warn players exactly how long the game can be played. And in terms of players being forewarned that eventually the game may be discontinued, being warned that you eventually have something removed from your library doesn't make the act itself not egregious. If somebody tells you, hey, in a year I might steal your IKEA furniture, that doesn't make the act of stealing my IKEA furniture any less, egregious. Ubisoft likes to bring up the fact that the crew had a badge on its front box noting that online connection is required, and there's fine print on the back that says Ubisoft may cancel access to one or more specific online features upon a 30-day prior notice. But the fact that it's fine print, it's an issue, and it doesn't specifically say that we're basically taking the product away from your library. It's not explicit that when customers buy a video game, that it can be stripped away from them. Somebody can go in there with a digital ghost and say you no longer own that product. That is just not explicitly stated ever. And then even if that was explicitly stated, the fact that companies have that level of control over someone's ownership of a product, that is just the problem. It's just a more modern and less invasive version of somebody coming into my house and taking an SNES cartridge from my home because they've decided that the license for that game has expired. Like, how egregious does that sound? Pretty, right? It's no different for digital products. It's just, again, the physical presence isn't there. And so companies just kind of feel like they can get away with it, and laws haven't really thought about it that way. But that's what Stop Killing Games is about, for laws to think of products, digital products, like how egregious it is if, somebody came in and stole a physical product from me, because they're both ultimately products. And then Guillemot addresses The Crew specifically and makes the dumbest argument about how Ubisoft launched a 2-week promotion in September of 2024 that offered the sequel for The Crew for just €1 or $1 across multiple online marketplaces, and also announced plans to make the game available offline in the future. It doesn't change the fact that The Crew 1 is still its own game, that it's a product that people bought, and that it was ultimately stripped away from all players who bought that product. It was burglared from their libraries. The sequel is irrelevant, and even within this argument, this $1 deal for the sequel to The Crew was for a limited time. Not everyone got to partake in that, and the sequel to The Crew is a different game from The Crew. Now, announcing that The Crew sequel will be available offline in the future, that's great, but it doesn't change the fact that the original The Crew, which is a different game from The Crew sequel, did not get that feature. It was not only sunset, but it was literally removed from players' libraries. Guillemot continues here, so this is an issue that we have been dealing with, but this kind of issue is not specific to Ubisoft. All video game publishers are faced with that issue. You provide a service, but nothing is written in stone, and at some point the service may be discontinued. Nothing is eternal. Nobody is arguing against that. Nobody is arguing that you need to support a live service or a video game for eternity. We're just asking that it still exists on some level, that you allow players to host their own private servers for online games that get shut down, or for single-player games that are in danger of disappearing forever because they're digital only, or they require day one patches that may not be available decades down the line, that those on some level be made available, and that laws guarantee that companies are held accountable in doing that. I mean, they say this is what we want to do, but there's no guarantee that they have to, and so they may decide, it's too much trouble. I don't want to deal with, end-of-life stuff for the game, because implementing end-of-life features that allow customers to retain the products that they bought might just be a bit too much trouble, might be inconvenient, might cost them some money. So without laws in place, companies ultimately don't have to be consumer-friendly, don't have to take preservation steps for their games, don't have to adhere to customers' preference of retaining the products and licenses that they buy. And so what Stop Killing Games is doing is make it so that legislation forces companies and it holds them accountable to ensure that they do what they claim they want to do, of keeping customers in mind and being considerate of, consumer protection, all these things that they've not really been doing a good job of. But yeah, nothing is eternal. We agree on that, and nobody's asking for that. And we're doing our best, he says, to make sure that things go well for all players and buyers, because obviously support for all games cannot last forever. You don't have to keep supporting your games, just leave it in a functional, playable state. Again, like the arguments that, video games, Europe and Ubisoft are making are just irrelevant to what Stop Killing Games is asking for. They keep misinterpreting or being purposely ignorant about what its intent actually is. And then Guillemot concludes with, but that's an issue that we're working on. That's something that the industry at large is working on to minimize impact on players. But clearly, that's something you need to factor in. Great, if that's something you care about, if that's something that you're working on, then it should be no problem when legislation passes mandating that you do this, that you provide some kind of end-of-life plan for both your single-player games, your live service games, all games across the board, so that they can be preserved on some level in gaming history, and so that customers don't feel like products are literally being robbed from their libraries. Anyway, back to Guillemot's statement here. The lifespan of a piece of software, whenever there is a service component, eventually services may be discontinued because eventually the software may become obsolete over time. A lot of tools become obsolete 10 or 15 years down the line. They're no longer available, and that is why we release a new version. And so we have version 2 and then version 3, but clearly this is a far-reaching issue and we're working on it. You're not releasing version 2 or version 3 of the same game. You're not updating the game so that it continues to exist in a more modern form, like a remaster or anything. The example you gave of The Crew 2, that's an entirely different game. The sequel to The Crew is an entirely different game from the first title, The Crew. Same way that God of War Ragnarok is a different game from God of War. Yes, they're related, but they're different products altogether. And saying, well, we have God of War Ragnarok here and we're supporting that doesn't justify the hypothetical scenario of the original God of War getting eliminated because you have a sequel and whatever. In that hypothetical scenario, people still paid for the original God of War. They want to have access to that original God of War. there's no justification for that original God of War to be taken away from players' libraries because that's a product that people purchased. So yeah, Ubisoft's arguments and their position on this is just incredibly weak and make no sense and seem to be entirely coming from an ignorant place, whether intentionally or not. Curse Farms here, Ross Scott, who is the leader and the man behind Stop Killing Games, the one who started this movement and has been taking the charge, posted the following in response. I'm surprised the CEO of Ubisoft has responded to Stop Killing Games. I think he might be purposely acting ignorant, talking about endless support, because that's not what Stop Killing Games is asking for. Curse Farms continues, it's easier for the industry to pretend they don't understand the demand than acknowledge the problem and the solution. And then right here we have SI.com, who reached out to Stop Killing Games' Ross Scott. And Ross Scott did provide a comment that you can find scrolling down here, where he said that he doesn't know if the CEO is pretending to be ignorant on this topic or if he's just genuinely being ignorant. But I suspect he could be playing dumb because it looks better for the industry to misrepresent what we're asking for than address our demand, because that would make them look bad. This also means most of his arguments are relevant in regards to what we're asking for. For example, we don't care how long companies support a game or not, only that they don't destroy customer purchases forever. It's such a simple concept what Stop Killing Games is requesting. It's such a reasonable thing what Stop Killing Games is requesting. And yet you got companies making statements as if this is, the be-all, end-all, like this will be destructive to the industry. Ross Scott's statement continues, the Stop Killing Games movement has never once asked for endless support from any publisher. We're asking that when publishers shut down their games, they do so in a responsible way so it is not deliberately disabled for all existing customers. The practice of video games being effectively destroyed is entirely preventable when planned for from the beginning, including ones designed to connect to the publisher while they're being supported. It's only negligence that this happens at all. 1,000% agreed. The fact that companies are claiming that this is just too much for them to handle is ridiculous. They just don't care to try, is really what's going on. And then finally, the statement here says, the CEO also refers to this as a service, but almost every service I can think of communicates how long it lasts when you pay for it. When you buy an insurance policy, it doesn't contain terms like it can be terminated at any time for any reason with no time frame, but that's exactly how these types of video games are sold. Customers have almost no protections at all and have to gamble how long their purchase will last. Is what I mentioned before about you don't know when a live service will end because you don't know how well it will perform. Publishers don't know how well a live service will perform. And so even publishers don't really know that they can't give an exact window of like, this is how long this product will last. This is how long you're renting this product for. Essentially, it'll last however long, publishers feel like it'll be financially viable to last. The statement concludes with, I think companies like Ubisoft are trying to redefine basic commerce in a way that's hostile to the customer. I do agree with his statement about this not being unique to Ubisoft. However, this is a widespread problem in the industry. Yeah, it is all basic commerce, but companies are trying to redefine commerce for digital products because they're digital and they can get away with certain things that you can't get away with physical products. But again, they're both products, and I don't think there should be a distinction in terms of the ability for companies to control the way you use your products or the way you have access to those products. But yeah, I hope Ubisoft continues to spout weak arguments because it'll serve as just more ammunition for when this Stop Killing Games movement does inevitably eventually go to legislation and we start to discuss potential laws that can be applied in the interest of consumers who have very vocally expressed their concerns about how companies not only not preserve video games, which is important for the history of video games, but also they destroy customers' purchases, which is important for consumer protection, which is something that the European Union takes very seriously. And they'll do so even more when they see just how many people signed this petition. At this point, more than 1 million signatures are likely legitimate. Maybe a couple 100,000 are not, but at 1.4 million signatures, this is surely good to go. Like, this will pass, and this is a discussion that we'll be having in the future. And I'll be sure to keep you guys updated on developments surrounding this and seeing how this will all impact the games industry's priorities when it comes to games preservation. It wasn't much of a priority before, but this may force them to make it more of a priority. And consumer protections when it comes to digital products not being able to be taken away from them might also become a priority and something that will lead to a lot of positive changes that will ensure companies don't exert the level of control that they can over people's products, because the fact that that ability exists is just ridiculous. Or at the very least, that's one man's take. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on the Stop Killing Games movement, recent developments, and Ubisoft's statements on this matter. And to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.